Hello and welcome to today's conversation on Tim Tom Talks. I'm Tim in Australia.
And I am Tom in Los Angeles, California. So today, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about some research, and Tim's actually going to cover that, research that 4i did with CEOs and company leaders on where they saw themselves going at the beginning of the year and then after COVID hit. And then we'll both be talking about it, but I'll lead the discussion on what we do with that and how we move forward.
So this was a really, sort of interestingly timed piece of research. So just essentially to give you the context, we engaged an external researcher consultant to go out both to our customers over the last couple of years and to leaders in the UK, in Asia, in Singapore, and over to the US, and essentially ask where they felt their primary challenges from a leadership development and an organizational cultural perspective were in the immediate future. And we were doing that in February 2020. So even though that's really not a long time ago, and from a research perspective, sort of everything should be valid for, some time after you go and have those interviews done. Obviously, as we all know, the world's changed. So did something happen? So we've had this massive calamity, of a human crisis, of an economic crisis, of a societal, sort of confrontation. And so how much of this research, sort of now can we apply? Well, what's interesting is that as we were working through, the outcomes of this research with Susie, the consultant, who was engaged to deliver the work, we were all reflecting, well, all of this is relevant. The question now is how will organizations rise to the opportunity to learn from and if anything, actually leverage the COVID experience to address these challenges. So essentially the interviews that Susie did, which were with managing directors, CEOs, founders, and, sort of HR executives, some very, very large, very well-known, sort of household brand name organizations, others small, nimble, agile, entrepreneurial, but a lot of consistencies in the challenges. So there were 4 key areas that she identified: scarcity-based thinking, fear-based cultures, lack of agility, and the term that Susie's using is cultural disintegration. So I'll just very quickly, a couple of minutes on what each of those mean, and then Tom and I'll start to unpack them and look forward now at what this means for us as we come through COVID. Or is there anything, sorry, Tom, you want to contribute something?
Oh, no, I just wanted to let people know that we will put the link to this article in the YouTube link. So you'll be able to scroll down and be able to click on that link to get a graphic of what this means as well.
Yeah, and if you're watching this on LinkedIn or Facebook or on Instagram, then the same links will be there. Or just go through to our link tree. So the article, just very quickly, is on the 4i's Lead Forward publication on Medium, as well as, of course, on our website. So scarcity-based thinking is essentially where the sort of the overriding cultural paradigm is there's not enough. There's not enough time, there's not enough resources, there's not enough appetite, or there's just not enough focus on something that everybody's agreed is important and we have the resources to move the dial on, but it's never there where it needs to be on the top of the priorities list. And that was very, very common. Sorry, Tom.
Yeah, and anytime I've been in a scarcity organization, there's a sense that this idea that we don't have enough permeates everything. And so the questions about trying new things or doing new things is always tepid because people are afraid to move forward because we don't have enough. We're in this scarcity idea. So it does permeate everything.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And that what's particularly troubling is that these two things that are prominent are very often linked. And when they are both present, because either of them can be damaging, but when they're both present, it completely stifles creativity and effective change and adaptability. So scarcity-based thinking and fear-based cultures, both of those will completely flatline all of those very, very necessary and productive parts of your organization: creativity, innovation, and effective change management.
And just know that if you're running on a scarcity or a fear base, the majority of your leadership is managing and leading in those areas. So scarcity and fear. So things are stifled. It's rare that things move forward. A lot of overthink, a lot of things getting stuck in approvals at different levels, rethinking, reanalyzing, repurposing, and not moving the needle.
Yeah. And specifically tending to live in the past. You're always interjecting, oh, well, we tried that before, or we've talked about this many times, but, and you can quite often diagnose these sort of organizational challenges very, very quickly just from tuning into the language that's being used. The inflection is always in the negative, and typically there's a justification based on a previous attempt. Even if that attempt was successful, oh, we did manage to get that sort of outcome, but we lost over here, or it's drew organizational resources away from there, or whatever.
And so if you ever need support of why this is bad, just go to Google Scholar and search scarcity thinking and fear-based thinking, and you will have a ton of research that tells you why you don't want to live in that area.
Yeah, 100%. So just quickly on fear-based, because I appreciate we've covered a few of the key areas already, but in particular, these kind of cultures, when the fear emanates from the top, it completely sort of disables the creative output and the innovative efforts of your middle layer of management, because they become so petrified of being called out for failing that they just don't try. They don't put their neck on the line. They don't want to put their head out there and have it ripped off. And in particular, one of the senior HR executives that we were talking to, which is from a global software company, was saying that they see this problem all the time with newly promoted people who just inherit all the old bad habits because they're too scared of getting it wrong. And then on the other end of the spectrum, there was a conversation with a partner of a global management consulting firm saying that a lot of the time they're effectively sort of completely reducing the costs they've incurred by hiring all these super bright, super productive people who then are too afraid to actually hand their model over for fear of having it ripped down by a partner whose ego's been bruised because the model is an improvement on the old one.
And a good way to identify if you're living in one of those cultures is if you're in a meeting and the leaders, every time when somebody's presenting, are pointing out errors, no matter how small, and not waiting until afterwards to talk to somebody and say, maybe correct that or correct this. But if they're pointing out in a meeting in front of everybody all the errors, people aren't going to be coming forward. That is a great temperature gauge, as if to identify if you're living in one of those cultures.
And fear-based cultures don't necessarily feel horrible. I mean, they very often do, but this is not necessarily fear stalking the hallways. It's more subtle. And if anything, those are the cultures that you need to pay even more attention to, because it won't be felt to the same extent. So there won't be resistance to it. It'll be like the sort of the soft, cuddly blanket that smothers everything good that you really want to create. So just to keep moving forward,
one other thing in that, you'll often get toxic leadership in that. So, and that toxic leadership that lives on being the savior, making everything wrong so he can come up with a solution, or she.
No, that's very, very true. And I can point to several examples of that from my own experience. So the other two areas that we'll move on to talk about now are lack of agility and cultural disintegration. And lack of agility, I mean, everybody should be aware of what a lack of agility feels like. Every time you try to do something different or shift or just throw a new idea out there, it just gets shut down. But it's because there's no appetite for change. And quite often what's frustrating about these kind of cultures is people talk about change a lot. But to quote from one of the Better World Leaders guests recently, Victoria Foster, you hear leaders who almost sort of are thinking that they want change. They sort of know that change is necessary. They know that change is a good idea, but they want it, but they don't want to do it. Right? They want somebody else to be leading the change. They want change to be almost sort of applied to them. They don't want to be the one that's doing it. So if you've got an idea, if you're trying to get something done, if you're trying to propose a new way forward, and everybody else is basically waiting for that first move to be made, well, the suggestion would be make the move and sort of deal with the repercussions. Cultural disintegration is, disintegration is a term which typically implies that something is being fragmented, it's being cast out, to the four corners. It's more also sort of, in this point, anti-integration, that, cultures are in stasis. They're not being pulled apart, but they're in stasis at a point where they're not integrated. So the challenge here is with large organizations or small, when leaders are not connected and don't have efficient and effective communication up and down and across and through the organization, they essentially become disintegrated from what's happening on the ground. And that quite often you see this most pronounced between head or regional office and then the satellite offices. The satellite offices will feel like they're sending messages up and getting nothing constructive back down, or that the office culture at headquarters is very different to the office culture down at the ground level. So those were the four main areas that were diagnosed. The question now is, how do we essentially take the learnings and the opportunity that's been created through the COVID crisis and try and move the dial and change all of these?
That's awesome, Tim. I really love that research. Susie did a great job. And I think, trans-specifically, it's true no matter which country you're looking at. And we know that. And like you said, now how do we move forward? The difference with today, and there's a great digital article, and I'll put a link to it into wherever we're posting this, but it's from HBR and it's about leading in a crisis. But what I'm referencing today is not only that, I'm referencing anything that I've read in leading through a crisis and moving out of this. But I think that that publication did one thing that was great. It said there are two phases of crisis. The emergency phase, which we've pretty much passed, although we keep getting things added into that with social unrest and these random things that we never thought we would hit this year. And who knows what's going to come next. But you have the emergency phase, then you have the adaptive phase. And no matter where you're living in those different cultures that Tim covered, or even if you're living in a more positive culture, nobody has led in a crisis like this. It's got urgency, it's got, what did they say it was urgency, high stakes, and uncertainty all together. Having all of that together requires us to have adaptive leadership. And it also requires CEOs and heads of organizations to realize that you can't have a hands-on approach at this time where you put your stakes in the ground and you say, okay, this is how we've done it and we're going to tell you what to do, because nobody's been here. And you're going to need your collective intelligence, meaning your collective wisdom from everybody to solve this problem. You're going to have rethink your business. And when you're thinking about adaptive leadership, think about, one is how you're going to develop leaders from now to the future, because we don't know how long it's going to work, but actually we do, because in this fourth industrial revolution, everything's going to change. As we get more AI and we get more VR and all these other technologies, we're going to need to be adaptive in our leadership styles, and we're going to need collective wisdom of the organization to find solutions. And we are not going to have all the answers, and we're going to have to be able to have leaders that tap into everyone that is touched by the outcome, and everyone that is touched by what's coming in. Developing leaders, and we're working on a program called Lead Forward that's going to do this. But no matter what I'm reading and no matter what Tim has read, because we've talked about this, if you don't have people that are able to hit reset, to rethink about the business, to look at different areas, you're going to lose some people in some areas. And just because people are going virtual doesn't mean they're going to be doing their same job virtually. You're going to have to rethink how they do work and what work they're doing, because you're probably going to be servicing your customers different, your products are changing differently, or they're going to service in a different way. It's rethinking about every part of your business and probably readjusting where your focus is or consolidating where your focus is, and then looking at new ways of managing that business and looking at new ways of keeping people safe, both internally, letting your customers know how safe you're being and how you're going to be safe for them. There's a myriad of topics that you're going to have to look at. Like, Tim, what are some that you can think of?
Well, look, I mean, I think to begin with, I would just reference back to, how do you counter, these issues, right? I mean, as you would know, so often scarcity-based thinking and fear-based thinking emanate out of stress, right? People are overloaded, they're overwhelmed, they're hyper-stressed. The natural reaction is to go into, sort of amygdala originated thinking, which is all about protecting, defending. I don't have enough. I've got to hoard. I've got to, hold, and so on and so on.
All the research is showing and has shown, in fact, the research from the companies that got through through the last recession, the Great Recession, were the companies that were able to rethink their business and actually build during the crisis versus retract. So when you're retracting just because of fear, because of scarcity, because of any of these four cultural categories that Tim was outlining, you actually need to re-energize and reimagine, re-inspire your group to rethink not how do we save, because this is the only thing we know, but how do we recreate to create more business so we create more security? Because it is in that you're going to create security, not in protecting and hoarding what you have. Because the minute that you start doing that, you're going to get into pricing wars, you're going to get into these crazy mindsets that aren't going to achieve profitability.
No, absolutely. So I think just very quickly, I'll say, I think, the focus on well-being and mental health is likely to be both more likely to happen because of the recognition of the anxiety and the stress that everyone's endured. But also I really hope that it's going to be more recognized as being, a beneficial investment for businesses to make. So I think that's another thing that'll help a lot. But also, I think everybody now is going to really understand, what adaptability feels like. Like it or not, I don't think there's anybody out there who hasn't had to radically adapt in some way, shape, or form. So I think the opportunity now to refocus on sort of perpetuating adaptability and learning an adaptive skill set, learning what adaptive leadership is, becoming an adaptive leader. I would hope that there'll be much more willingness to do that and less resistance from, sort of the need to do it. And finally, with cultural integration, to move away from cultural disintegration, there's been so much made and so much made of and so much said about, this sense of oneness that this crisis has brought out. Now, whether or not that becomes very temporary and transient, and once kind of the crisis mode is over, people essentially sort of forget about why they had that feeling of oneness and coming together and wanting to share and wanting to collaborate, and that we are all in this together, this being life and this, sort of opportunity we have to create an amazing, better world. Not just, we were all in COVID together and now let's all get at each other's throats again. So potentially this very unique, sort of historic first that everybody on this planet is experiencing this crisis together that may be not enough, but it will be a starting point to start to overcome and move to, cultural disintegration and move towards cultural integration. And how we do that, we're going to talk about much more as we talk about leading forward.
This isn't now or in the foreseeable future going to be a time like it used to be. It's going to be different. So that stake really doesn't fit anymore.
No, that's perfect. So I think that's been a thorough initial exploration of this topic. We're essentially going to be talking about this more or less for the rest of the year as we look to the launch of Lead Forward for 2021. But I hope at a high level that's been interesting. It's been informative. If you can immediately relate to any of those four, sort of research, sort of verified cultural situations, and you want to throw in your 10 cents and tell us what you think or tell us what it's like, please do. We'll look forward to the comments wherever you're viewing this. And if you need some help, if you want some ideas, first of all, you can refer to the insights page of the 4iLeadership.com website, or you can get in touch with either of us or anyone within the group, and we'd love to hear from you and see what we can do to help you.
Yeah, and equally, if you work for one of those companies that's doing great during this time period, we'd love to hear from you as if what we're saying is matching what you're experiencing, or if you have some other ideas that we didn't cover, that would be greatly appreciated as well. So from California, thank you for your time. I appreciate you. I appreciate you, Tim. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Tom. And thank you to everybody who has given us their time and attention in being here with us today. We will see you again soon.
Bye-bye.